Forgot to do that. Okay. So back to where we started. Maya is sort of the industry leader in terms of animation tools. Max has a lot of similar animation tools, but Maya's really just go a little bit deeper and a little bit further. So that's a lot of the reason that it's sort of the most popular application, I guess, among studio animators. Oh, sorry, I've got an error message here. Something about audio. Audio sounds okay to you guys, though, right? Looks like it. Okay, GoToMeeting is just a little bit cranky sometimes. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is just sort of an introduction to all of the animation tools in Maya. This can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're not a Maya user, if you haven't been using Maya all this time. Even if you have been using Maya, the animation tools aren't, probably what you would learn first. You would probably learn some of the modeling stuff, a lot of these menus up at the top. But the animation tools are really where the power, I think, is within Maya. So to start out, we're going to this is just the default screen that I've opened in Maya, aside from my custom shelf. So let's just put the animation one on there. So I've got nothing here, but what I notice on the bottom here, this is the timeline. I hope you guys can see my cursor. I'm sort of clicking through. So the timeline is sort of where all your animation happens, where you can set your keys, see your keys. It's not the only place you can animate in Maya, but it's sort of the starting point. So to illustrate that, let's just create a sphere. We'll put that on 5 so we can see it. We'll smooth it. And I've just, for those of you who are not Maya users, I just, there are some key codes in Maya. 1, 2, 3, basically spacebar will sort of maximize and minimize the viewport that the mouse is over. So I've got the mouse over the top if I want to max that, minimize that. Oh, there we go. That's weird. Maya key codes made the GoToMeeting window go away. Anyways, you guys can't see that anyway. So, so I'm just maximizing the front view, and then 1, 2, and 3 keys will sort of adjust the smoothing levels of whatever it is that I've got selected. So we're gonna go with that's a 3. That's not quite round. So let's do a new sphere, and we'll do interactive, and that'll give us a more round one. There we go. Oh my, GoToMeeting is now in my way. Oh, it looks like we lost somebody. Hopefully she'll make it back. Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to get the sphere set up to be in the middle. I'm going to give it a radius of 1. So that's wide of 0.5. Okay. Okay, so still 1, 2, 3 for smooth levels. We're just going to leave this on 1 because that'll be sufficient for us. And then 4, 5, and 6 basically go between wireframe, shaded, and then 6, if there were any textures on this, they would show up with 6. 7 will show up the lighting mode. So we are going to stay in 5 so that we can see this, and we're going to stick with the front view for now. Okay, so now that we've got a sphere that we can animate, this isn't exactly in the middle. There we go. We've got a sphere we can animate. Now we can start talking about the timeline. So the timeline's basically got, all of these frames, 1, 2, 3 through 24 right now. Down here at the bottom, it's got, these 4 boxes with numbers. So these are basically the extents and the in and out points of your timeline. So right now I've got 1 to 48 frames. Those are these 2 outer numbers. That's the totality of what I'm going to be animating right now. This slider in here basically will go to a chunk of those. So you see how these inner numbers are changing as I move this slider. Basically right now I'm looking at frames 1 to 24. If I slide this, I can look at 2 to 25 and so on. I can also just manually change that and say that I want to look at frames 1 to 16 right now, let's say. And so that's another way to do that. You can also sort of click on this little square on the right side and dynamically drag that. So I just said I wanted to look at the whole timeline. I could also just adjust this so that my full timeline is only 24. So you've got a lot of flexibility here in how you would change each thing. Let me just check and feel free to type questions in the chat at any time. I'm just going to make sure there aren't any right now. If I can get the chat open, that is. Okay, it looks good. Yeah, so, okay, so that's the basic timeline frame navigation. Let's just go back to 24. And then over here on the right, you've sort of got this little box with a number in it. You know, you've got these play, pause, stop buttons. Well, actually not a pause and a stop, but basically you've got play, and then, you know, while you're playing, the stop will be visible. So we don't have any animation right now to play, but if we did, it would be playing. You've also got these sort of step through buttons. So actually, let's put a little bit of animation before we get back to those buttons. So the basic way that you animate is by setting keyframes. If you've taken a 2D animation class or even a 3D animation class in Max, then you're familiar with the term keyframes, those being sort of the major keys, and then breakdowns, which would also, in the Maya timeline, a breakdown would also be set as a key, and then in-betweens. So let's just create a quick key. Basically, to create a key, there are a lot of different ways you can do this. You want to have the object selected. I'm going to create a key on the sphere. So I can do a couple of things. I can go up here to the channel box, and I can say I want to set a key just on the translate. So I can right-click and say key selected. And so those 3 boxes have turned red to indicate that there's a key set there. You'll also see on the lower left here on the timeline that there's a red line on that frame. So if I deselect this, all that goes away. You don't see it anymore. So keys in the timeline and in the channel box will basically only show up for your selected object. So select that again. I see that I've got a key there. But I can see in the channel box that key is only on the translate. There's no key on the rotate. So you know, nothing's going to animate as far as the rotation goes, unless I were to come and set a rotation key like this. Or you can also just do key all, and that's going to key all. That's going to set a key for all of the keyable attributes. For most things, all the keyable attributes will work. If you're working with a production rig, there may be attributes that are not keyable, and that'll be set up by the rigger that rigged your character. So mostly you can use this all keyable attributes unless you want to be, well, let's not get into that just yet. That's a sort of an animation style issue. So, okay, so we've got everything keyed there. Let's select this guy again. Another way I can set a key is to use this auto keyframe toggle. So if it's red, this is down here in the lower right. If it's red, it's on to, that means anytime I have this guy, anytime I move this guy, it will set a key. Now notice, let's see. I've already got a key set here, so if I were to go to frame 10 and just move this guy with auto key on, you'll see that now I've got another key on the keyframe. Now if I undo that and I uncheck auto key, I can move this guy and nothing's going to happen. So you have to be really, really careful with auto key. I would recommend, you know, if you're just starting out animating, or even if you've been animating for a long time, if you haven't tried auto key, you can try it. I would recommend being really, really careful with it because it's very easy to unintentionally set keys. I prefer to keep auto key off and manually set my keys. The other thing with auto key that can really mess you up is if it's on and you've already got this key set on frame 1, it's perfect, it's just how you want it. You think you're on frame 12, but you're on frame 1, you move something, and again, it's messed up your animation. So I generally will keep that off. But like I said, lots of animators use auto key, and they do just fine with it. You just have to be a little bit careful and always keep it in your mind that you could be setting keys. So back to this guy, I'm gonna drag this guy over here, and another way to set a key, again, auto key is off. So now I've got my, you know, I've clicked on, so, you know, this is frame 1. I'm clicked on frame 10 now. I'm just going to move this guy over, and I can actually just hit the S key. So the S key is sort of the shortcut key to set a key, and that will set a key on all of the keyable attributes. So I've got that S key. Now I've got some animation. I've got just this ball moving from left to right. Let's go ahead and set a key in the middle there as well on frame 5 to have it go up in the air, again hitting the S key. Okay, so we've got some keys. Now if I hit that play button, my animation just plays over and over and over again. In terms of previewing animation, just using this play function isn't the best predictor. As you can see, it's going really, really fast. This is hitting the play button in the timeline will basically play the animation as fast or as slow as your computer or workstation allows. So if you've got a fast computer, it'll be really fast. If you've got a slow computer, it'll be really slow. It's not really a real-time preview. There are sort of settings. You can set the animation to preview in real time or to try to emulate real-time playback, but even that isn't super accurate. So in terms of testing, I would recommend actually using a Playblast, and we'll get back to that in just a minute. So just to finish up these navigation keys over here, we've got the play, which is obvious. You can play backwards, same thing. And then just going back to frame 1, I've got these 2 red line sort of arrows. Those will basically step through from key to key. And then on the outside of that, I can step through frame by frame by frame. And this is just within, what's visible on the timeline. So if I were to make less keys visible and do that step through, it'll start back at 1 after 16. If I have more visible, it'll go all the way through. So this is basically a frame at a time, a key at a time, and then you've got your end and beginning. And again, that's with the visible timeline. Okay, so now back to real-time preview. Actually, let me talk about animation preferences, but I'm going to leave that to a little bit later. So if you want to get a real-time preview of your animation, what you can do is Playblast it, and that will basically create, it's not a render or anything, it's just basically an animated preview of what the actual speed of the animation will be, but it'll be a render of the viewport. So exactly what you're seeing here is what you'll see in your animation. So to get a Playblast, you can click anywhere on the timeline or just right-click anywhere on the timeline and hit Playblast. If you go to that option box there, you'll see that you've got a few options. I think, I usually just stick with QuickTime, and you can, choose where you want it to end up. Oh, Maya does not like that. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at the default. Wherever that ends up right now is going to be fine. Actually, let me set that so that we know where it is. Desktop. Put that on the desktop, and we'll just call it Playblast Test. Sometimes I just leave things at the default, and I end up finding things months later after I've done one of these demos, and I think, what is that, and what is that from? Okay, so we've got all our settings set. Encoding, animation, that's going to be fine. Display size from render settings, we'll do from window. So from render settings would basically, if you had your render set to 1024 by 768, it would render it at that size. I'm just going to do from window, so it's going to render the Playblast the size of this window. Actually, you know what, I am going to go back to render settings because this window is really big, and I don't think I want to Playblast that big. So scale 1, frame padding, usually you don't need to worry about those. Let's just hit this and see what happens. So you'll see sometimes that can be quick, sometimes it can be slow. Maya, you'll see it very quickly sort of made a little window over here and ran through every frame, and that was basically Maya creating this video. So then it will pop up a video for you. And basically that's the Playblast. That's the real-time speed of this animation. So it's probably a little bit fast. And I apologize, QuickTime does not like to cooperate so much with this GoToMeeting recording software, so it might be a little jumpy on your end. But if I go to my desktop, I can see now that I've got this this playblast.mov. Oh, and I've got the GoToMeeting. So yeah, so basically that's how you want to preview your animation. That's going to give you a more accurate reading of the actual speed in it, the speed of it. And so that's probably, I think when I animate, what I will do is Playblast very frequently. You know, I'll set a couple keys, adjust a couple curves, Playblast, see how it looks. And then, you know, go back in, set a couple more keys or adjust a couple more keys, Playblast, see how it looks. And it's a really quick way to test your animation because, again, you're not waiting for a render that takes care of all the lighting and textures and so forth. It's just a quick what you see is what you get in the viewport. If I had textures on in the viewport or textures applied to this object to begin with, it might take a little longer to Playblast, but you would see it with some basic textures. So it's a great tool to use. Okay, so let me just check my notes here, make sure we don't get off track. Okay, so Playblasting. Now that we've got some animation, we know how to test it. We probably want to know how to adjust it. This ball is sort of moving up in a diagonal and back down in just, you know, a straight line, and that's not how a ball bounces. So how can we fix that? The other problem we've got is we probably want this ball bounce. Let's just say we want it to be even. I've got 4 frames on the way up, and then I've got 5 frames on the way down. So my timing, I'd like to adjust my timing, and I'd like to adjust the position of the ball in between. So I can set, let's adjust the timing first. There are a couple ways we can do that. One is I can select, so I've got my mouse over frame 5. I'm going to shift key, left click, and you see now it's that whole keyframe has turned red. Basically, I've got that key selected, and once it's selected, I can move it anywhere on the timeline. I can also right click, copy it, and I can then paste it. Let's say I want to paste it on frame 15. I'm going to do paste connect. Paste connect basically will connect the curves in the graph editor, and that will make more sense. Well, that did not work out like I wanted. Copying and pasting keys. So, like I said, the paste connect. When you're animating, your animation creates curves in the graph editor, and when you copy and paste, that can be a little bit tricky. In any case, though, so shift left click. That's going to give you your key. Again, you can copy paste it. Another trick, and this is absolutely my favorite, most useful Maya trick for animation ever, is now that I've got this selected, I can middle mouse button, drag that key over to frame 15, let's say, and oops, I just moved it, sorry. So without it selected, I've got my mouse over frame 5. I am going to middle mouse button, drag over to frame 15, and what I've done is I have basically drug all those values over to 15, and now if I hit the S key, that same key, it's sort of like a shortcut for copying keys. So now I've got that same key at frame 15, and if I want to copy frame 10, again, I can just middle mouse button, drag over to frame 20, hit that S key. So that's a way you can sort of copy keys. And now that I've got these copied, let's say I want it to bounce a little further to the right. So I've got it here. I'm just going to drag there. So now my ball is sort of going to do, oops, I forgot to hit the S key. So that's another thing if you to be careful of. You know, you can be over a frame and make all of these adjustments and get the position just right. And if you're working with a character, you can actually, you want to be really careful with this because you'll create a whole pose. You know, you've got the legs and the toes and the fingers and everything just positioned just right. And if you don't hit that S key, or again use auto key if that's your preference, you will lose all of that as soon as you change frames, as just happened to me. So now I've got this guy, and then I want to take this last key and move that over. So just to demonstrate, I've moved this over. It's in the perfect position. If it were a character pose, it would be ready. Once I move off of that frame, it bounces right back because I didn't set that key. So go back to that key, and we'll actually set it this time. with the S key shortcut. So I've got sort of 2 bounces. Yeah, so we were copying. Let's go back here. I'm going to set this to 0. I really like even numbers. And like I was saying, we've got 4 frames for the first and then 5, 5, and 5. I'm going to do that shift left click to get that key highlighted, and then I'm just going to move it 1 to the left. So now my animation starts on frame 0. I could also, if I wanted to, move this whole chunk of frames. Let's say we wanted this whole chunk of frames to happen 24 frames later. So I'm going to shift left click and then drag, oops, with the shift key still held down, I'm going to drag over, and now I've got all these keys selected. And what I can do, whoops, this is a little bit finicky. And what I can do now is just move them all. You want to be careful to click in the toward the middle of that selection, otherwise it will deselect rather than letting you move them. And so now all my keys are happening starting at frame 24. Let's just go back to, whoops, like I said, if you don't select in the middle, it will deselect instead of moving. I have that problem quite a bit, actually. Okay, so we've got back to our keys. Okay, so when a ball bounces, it bounces, let's say, quickly at first and then more slowly. So we'll move those keys out just to get that. Yeah, that's a really fast preview, but that's okay for now. Okay, so breakdowns. One way I can do that is, if I want that ball to move on a curve, I can go to that middle frame. I can sort of move that ball and set a key. That's going to give me sort of a nicer bounce. It's still a little angular. That's not ideal, because to get that exact path, I might need to set a key here, and I might need to set a key here that's, a little bit farther up and over. And before you know it, you've got your whole timeline clogged up with keys, and it becomes really difficult to edit. So I am just going to delete these keys. And now we're going to talk about the graph editor, which is just a fantastic, fantastic tool. There's also a curve editor in 3D Studio Max. I don't think it's quite as robust as the Maya version, so let's just go to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And this tool has so much power. You can use all of the Maya viewport shortcuts, viewport shortcut key codes in the graph editor. So F, for example, will frame everything that's selected. You can use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You can use the Alt key to zoom. Of course, you can't orbit and sort of tumble in this graph editor because it is a 2D editor, but basically everything else will work. So the graph editor will show you the curves of whatever is selected. If I deselect this sphere, let's say I create a cube. The cube doesn't have any keys, so nothing's showing up in the graph editor. I go back to the sphere, and then I see everything in here. So let's move our animation over a little. We can talk about what this graph editor does and why it is so awesome. So we wanted our ball to take sort of more of a rounded trajectory up to that first bounce, and we can set that with keys, but again, that's maybe a sloppy way to animate. So let's take a look at what we've got in this graph editor. We've got curves on every attribute that's got a key set. So as we can see in our channel box, we've got keys set on all 3 translates, all 3 rotates, and all 3 scales. We're not really working with the rotate and the scale right now in this demo, so let's just select those translates, and that's going to only show those 3 curves. If I were to do rotate, that'll show all of those. Again, the rotates aren't doing anything, so all the curves are sort of flat. Okay, so we've got our translate X and our translate Y and our translate Z. We're not really using translate Z. We're really just having this ball move through X space and through Y space. So let's take a look at the Y curve. We can see on the bottom here we've got our frame numbers, 0 through 24, because that's what's showing in our timeline. And then we've got the value. So if I select this ball on frame 5, you'll see the graph editor snaps to frame 5. I can look in the channel box and see that my translate X on that frame is 5.769. I want that to be 6. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to hit the S key. That's going to move that right up to here. Another way you could adjust that key is just selecting that key in the graph editor and moving that value. So, you know, I want it to be all the way up there. Again, this is something to be careful with because as you can see, my key's on frame 5 right now. If I select it in the graph editor, I can move it to frame 6. I can move it to frame, you know, 7. I can basically change the timing of my animation, and if you don't mean to do that, that can be very frustrating. So let's see. This is why this tool is so powerful. With the bouncing ball, basically what you're animating for the most part is the Y value as it translates through time, as well as, again, that X. You'll see the bouncing balls going from one point to another. Let's say we want it to happen evenly. We can, you know, let's say we don't want, you know, maybe our key, I was just sort of guesstimating when I drug that ball to the right. Maybe I would rather let the computer determine the exact midpoint. I can select this key and I can just hit my back key to delete it. And now my ball is going to move at a very consistent pace left to right. If I were to go back to frame 2, or sorry, it wasn't frame, it was frame 5, and set that key, now it's going to be perfectly in the middle. I'm going to have a perfectly flat curve. For the purpose of the bouncing ball, I think that's what I want, so I'm going to stick with that. Back to that Y. Now we're finally going to get somewhere with this ball. So I've basically got a key selected, and you'll see these 2 pink lines. Those are the tangents of that animation curve. The animation curve would be this whole green line. Again, that's from the keys I set, whether I set them in the graph editor or the timeline doesn't make a difference. They'll all show up here. So with that point selected, I can change that tangent type. So if I change that to spline, now I go back and look at my animation and look at how that ball is sort of more, it's kind of starting out a little bit faster and then slowing down toward the top. It's kind of slowing into that curve a little bit. That's usually what you want for a bouncing ball. And then when it comes down, again, you want it to hit the ground and sort of snap off really fast. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to change this to flat clamped. Okay, so we've got spline, which basically, let's go through these types. Spline basically will create sort of the default spline for that. And then clamped is very similar to spline, but if I had 2 keys very close to each other, like let's set a key here. Now I've got these keys that are very close to each other. If I hit spline, you'll see it creates sort of an overshoot in that curve. Let's zoom in so we can see that a little bit better. Whereas if I hit clamped, well, theoretically that overshoot is a little bit less. These 2 are very similar, but if you want to keep sort of clean overshoots, I would recommend going with clamped rather than spline, just as a sort of start. And then we've got plateau, which plateau is similar to spline, but it will keep your curves from overshooting. So notice when we had spline and clamped, we have that overshoot. And what that means for our bouncing ball is that when the ball gets down here, it's going to actually go, let's delete this key so we can see that a little more clearly. It's going to actually go sort of through the ground a little bit. It's staying on the ground, and if we were to zoom in really close, we can see it's going a little bit through. And we don't want that, so that's what a flat or a, sorry, plateau tangent will take care of. It will ensure that the bounds of your motion are set by the key and not by any overshoots in the curve. So that's really helpful too. But again, this is a bouncing ball. We want it to hit the ground and snap back off. So let's see if we can find our, this might be a good time to talk about, well, actually we've got stepped keys. Let's just go through the rest of these really quick. We've got the stepped keys, which basically, stepped keys are, it's going to hold that keyframe Let's see, our ball's sort of behind us. Let's zoom out a little bit. It's going to hold that keyframe until the next one. So when you're in your first animation path blocking, that's often what you want. You want to just see your poses. So as I'm sort of scrolling through the timeline, oh, actually, I'm only setting stepped on. I'm only setting these on my translate key. So let's do it on all three just to be consistent. So stepped keys, it's going to hold basically the first pose until you get to the next one. Oh, we've really messed that up, haven't we? Oh, whoops. Again, forgot to hit that S key, the ever important S key. Okay, so let's go back and clean these keys up. So stepped curves, and then we've got flat tangents, linear. This is going to be pretty important too. So linear will basically create a straight line between each key. Again, we've gone over, we went over plateau. Flat tangents are sort of you'll notice that every tangent is flat. Plateau is it's sort of a compromise between spline and flat where, you know, if it's at the top or the bottom, it will make it flat. If it's in between, it will make it splined. So, okay, now let's clean up this bouncing ball a little bit more. Okay, so we've got this motion, but again, our ball is sort of, something funky's happening down here. So we want to look at that Y, and to get that snappy sort of bounce, let's just grab this tangent and make it linear. Let's do that for the first one too. And you can see the bouncing ball is a great example because your curves will sort of look like the bounce you want. You know, you make those bottom parts linear. And again, now it's sort of got a more realistic bounce. It's going up, it's bouncing off. It looks like that second bounce is it's going a little bit too far. I can actually move these keys in the graph editor to make that bounce a little bit shorter. So now let's see how we like that. And notice anything I do in the graph editor, it's affecting my keys on the timeline. So again, that comes back to that. Be really careful. I'm not sure why I've got a key here. In the interest of cleaning that up, we'll just delete it. Got a key on frame 22 that we don't need, so we'll just delete that. There's something to be said for working clean, especially in the graph editor. So let's see. Oh, it looks like our translate key was the one we just deleted. So let's drag that over a little bit farther. I think what I did is I scaled the animation without scaling the translate keys. And again, okay, so back to working clean. By working clean, that means you basically only want to have as many keys set as you need. You know, you want to have clean curves. Clean curves will give you smooth motion. So looking at this translate curve, you know, it's not really as smooth as I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and delete this middle key again. Let's work with just the translate for now. I'm going to make that a smooth linear tangent. So now, you know, with regard to the X translation, my ball's moving at an even speed, and that's what I want. Again, the Y, we've got a linear curve here. Maybe I want it to go up a little bit more. So I can select, let's get zoomed in just right, frame this view. I can select this tangent. Let's say I want to make it go up a little bit more. I can drag that sort of tangent handle, and it's adjusting that motion. So a real easy way to see this is, let's leave our timeline on frame 2. So frame 2 doesn't have a key. The position of this ball is set by what we see in the graph editor. So if I drag this curve, I'm changing the position of the ball, and that's really where your power comes from. So let's drag this guy. So I'm going to drag it over. Let's just leave that guy for there for now. We've got flat up here, which is what we want. Over here, we want, you know, again, let's say we want, whoops, again, be very careful. You don't want to, like I said, you're changing your animation. So let's say I want this to come, you know, higher up here, but I don't want this other side to sort of flatten out the way it has when I when I was dragging this tangent. What I can do here is hit this little key. You'll see it with the green top on it. Oops, did I hit the wrong one? No, I hit this one. So this is your break tangents key. It's got a red on the right side. And now what I can do is I can edit each side of the tangent independently. So now I can get that nice bounce up happening just the way I want it. On the end one, let's break it just to be consistent. You don't necessarily need to break it because it's the end of your animation, but to be consistent, we will. And so now, again, that's looking a little bit more like the bouncing ball motion you envision. And after you work in the graph editor for a while, you'll start to be able to see your animation in your mind in terms of curves, and it'll become a lot easier. I know it can seem overwhelming at first. The graph editor can seem maybe a little bit more technical than, as animators, we tend to be visual people. It can be a little bit more technical at first, but trust me, once you get used to it, it's really got a lot of power. You can animate things very quickly that might take a lot of time to set using visual keys. So let's just do a quick Playblast to test this. I've already set up my Playblast. Now it just wants to know if I want to replace the old one with the new. We'll say OK on that. Maya's recording it, and it should pop it up here in just a second. There we go. So let's see. All right, that's a pretty decent start. Yeah, it looks like the timing there is not too bad. The spacing is not too bad. So yeah, that's looking good. So let's say I want to add another bounce on the end. I'm fairly happy with this. You know, probably in the real world it would require a little more tweaking than this. But let's say I want to add another bounce in the end. I can do that without even leaving the graph editor. I can go to, let's select this guy. Actually, let's select both of these. And let's do, let's go over this menu. We've got all of our copy pastes in here for keys. So let's say if I had a key here, this is only on the Y, so let's just hit S. What I did is hit S so that would be a key on the translate X as well as the Y. So if I'm here, I can again go to this edit, copy, and I can go to, let's say, frame 23, and I can hit edit, paste, and now I've got a new key. You know, this, again, we've got this nice sort of bouncing motion, a nice linear translation. It doesn't look quite right. I can fix this without even leaving the graph editor. I, can look at this and say, oh, I think I want this key to be more like here. That looks vaguely like a straight line. I can go back here and delete these two keys, and now I'm back to that nice smooth translation. My bounce isn't looking quite right, so let's go here. These tangents are already broken. I can unify them again. Again, right now the tangent weights are separated. I can unify them again by hitting this key, and that's going to let me, again, if I move one, it's going to adjust the other. I want to go back to broken. And let's say I want a key in the middle here. Let's go to frame 20. I just want to set a key on Y, so I'm going to go to translate Y, key selected, and that's, so now if I look at the X, it has not set a key, it's only set a key on that Y. And I'm going to drag that down because I want this bounce to be lower. And again, my graph, I can tell by looking at this graph editor curve that this animation is going to be sloppy on this last bounce. So if I look at the last bounce here and this, looking at the ball, yeah, it's not moving quite right. It's not got a nice arc. It's sort of moving diagonally down, and it's moving to the right a little bit, and then down again. So yeah, that's not quite as smooth as I want it. Again, I'm just going to go in, grab that full tangent. Let's go with flat on that. And oops, let's adjust this guy a little bit. And that's going to give us a little bit smoother motion. So now let's see, let's try the viewport play. Just going to minimize that. Let's get this maximized a little bit. So that's a little too fast to test. Again, let's go to that Playblast and see where we're at. We will overwrite the old one. One thing to make sure of is if you've, well, actually I'll demonstrate this. And this is something that'll just, it catches me off guard frequently, and you might have the same problem. If I've got this Playblast open, I'm testing it. Okay, the bounces look pretty good. Maybe that last bounce is a little bit too big for the way the ball would naturally slow down. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to make some adjustments, and then, you know, say I made those adjustments and I want to test them again. I hit that Playblast again. It says, do you want to overwrite? And now I should get an error because there we go. So we've got unable to create video track check format. Not the most helpful error. Thanks, Maya, for that. But basically what that is I left the old Playblast open and it can't overwrite it. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if I close that, now Playblast, now it's gonna work just fine. So that's just something to be careful of. And again, you know, that last bounce just a little bit too long. Let's go back to the graph editor. And again, very easy to change your animation in the graph editor. I'm okay with the translate, but I want that bounce to be shorter. So let's try that, and let's make it a little bit lower. Okay, so now our curve here looks like a more, let's make this bounce a little higher. Actually, let's take all of these keys and move them out one. Yeah, that should work. Now it looks like we've got a little bit more even bounces. Going to take this and, oops, let's break that tangent so that we can adjust just the right side. There, and so now looking at my Y curve, that's looking good. I think that's about how I want it. So, yeah, and again, that play is way too fast to really test anything. Let's go back to this window, hit that Playblast. And so again, whoop, where did it go? I should be popping that up. There we go. So I've really quickly created a fairly, you know, fairly realistic bouncing ball by just, you know, there's no squash and stretch or rotation or anything like that. But again, I've done the basics of it just mostly using the graph editor, and I've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys on the Y, 2 keys on the X. So I'm animating very clean. It's going to be very easy to go in here and adjust things. For example, let's say I want that translate to go farther. I want to keep that linear, however. I've just moved that translate. I haven't adjusted the Y. My bounces are still going to be the same height. But now, using those same keys, other than that changing that last Y one, my bounces are going much farther across the screen. That last one, we've got our keys misaligned. So what I can do is, again, you know, I've got a key on the Y here. Basically, the only thing changing between frames 22 and 23 is that translate X. I want the X movement to end at the same time as the Y movement. I'm just going to, because I know there's only a key on the X on 23, I can just move that over. That's not going to affect my Y on frame 22. If I had multiple keys on that, let's just undo that. Control Z back a little bit. You know, if I had multiple things set on that and didn't want to risk overwriting, you know, copying one key onto the other, overwriting it, what I would do is just come into the graph editor again, grab this, move it back one. Now we see that everything is on frame 22. We don't have a rogue frame 23 key. Okay, so we are getting close to, I want to leave some time for questions. Actually, check again if anyone has any questions right now. Like I said, type into the chat anytime if a question pops into your head. I don't see anything right now, so okay, so that sounds good. So yeah, a couple more sort of things to talk about then if there are any questions. And again, pipe in at any time. Let's see, do I have key snapping on? If I were to, let's grab all this animation in the graph editor and let's go to scale. This is sort of a risky activity. Whoops. Oops, whoa, whoa, whoa. You can scale your animation in the graph editor, theoretically. Usually this works for me. You can do edit, scale. And it's not letting me do it, which actually might be fortuitous because the next thing I was going to say is it's not generally a good idea to scale your animation in the graph editor because what you can end up with is partial keys. If you need to scale animation, I would suggest using another animation editor we've got called the Dope Sheet. So animation editor's dope sheet. This, I think, I don't use the dope sheet for much. The dope sheet is sort of a way to kind of graph out your animation, similar to what you might have in a timing chart in traditional 2D animation. So what I can do here is I can see all these keys. I can select them one at a time. I've got up to frame 24, so whoops. And again, you can, you're actually changing your animation when you select it in here. So I've got this selected. I can use, oops, I can move it. I can scale it. So the dope sheet is going to scale those keys. But then you'll notice down here, looking at the timeline, let's close this guy. Let's close this guy. I've scaled that animation, but now look at my keys. I've got, this is frame 16 and this is frame 15. We can see this even better if we zoom in on a smaller section, smaller section of our timeline. This key is now in between frames 15 and 16, and and this one is even more so. The computer sort of interpolates everything exactly. So I scaled it. It wasn't a perfectly even number, you know, like I said, the computer made that exactly as you know, this was 50% between the other two. It's still 50% between the other two, but now it's not an even number of keys. So what we would call these are partial keys, and they generally are not something that you want. So to fix this, I can select just this key, have my mouse over this key, and I can do snap, and it's going to snap it to the closest keyframe. If you've scaled an animation, I think your generally best practice is to select all your keys and snap. And because I selected the keys in the timeline, if I go back to the graph editor, you'll see that it snapped it on every attribute, translate X, Y, Z, rotate X, Y, Z, even though those are not animated, and scale X, Y, Z. So now I've got all my keys back to even numbers. So this is a great thing. And, you know, scaling your animation, it's something that you'll need to do it sometimes. It's, like I said, generally it's a risky sort of thing to do, especially in the graph editor. You can also scale right in the timeline. I can select this whole animation. Again, I was just, let's go back and do that again just to reiterate the keys. I'm selecting here, and then I'm going to shift, left click, drag. That's selecting all my keys. Oops, let's make sure I've got them all. And then I can, you know, I can scale it right in the timeline. I want this to only take, I want all this animation to only take 14 frames. But again, I've got those partial keys, and that's just not what I want. So I can go back in. I can snap all my keys. Theoretically, I don't have partial keys anymore. It looks like I still have one here. Let's see if we can snap that. Snap that. So sometimes there's a lot of cleanup when you scale. So let's undo that because that's going to have messed up our nice. And anytime you do that snap, it is going to change your timing a little bit. Like I said, you know, if the exact in between for a couple of frames is something that's not on even frames, the computer will interpolate it and it will jack up your timing a bit. So now it looks like I've got a key on 16 and 17. I must have done something while I didn't have the Translate Z selected, which is fine. We can just, you know, we're not even using this Translate Z. We can just go in here, delete all these curves, or delete all those keys. Notice in the channel box now, Translate Z is not keyed. If I want to, you know, rekey that, I'm going to have to go back through and set each key. But, you know, we don't really need those keys. For that matter, we can select all these that we're not animating and delete those keys. Visibility, we're not animating that attribute, so we can delete those. And now I've basically got a clean animation. I've got X translate and Y translate animated for that ball. Let's make this graph editor a little bit smaller. And that's basically all I need right now for my bouncing ball. Later I might add in some rotation. I might add in some scaling for squash and stretch. But for now, let's just keep it clean. My whole animation can be summed up with just these two curves. It's very easy to edit. Hopefully that's a good example to help show you the power of the graph editor. Let's see, I've got two more things I want to cover really quickly. The first one is, okay, so this box here I forgot to mention is your current frame. So whichever frame you're on, if you wanted to go to a particular frame, you can type it in, puts you on frame 2. But let's talk about animation preferences. So this icon way over here on the right side of the timeline, that's going to open your animation preferences. A lot of stuff in here. Let me just check my notes, make sure I go over just the important ones. I got 4 pages of paper in front of me. Still you have to go old school when you're recording these meetings because you can't keep your notes on the screen, so killing trees. Yeah, so the basic things you want to set in here are, you've got your time slider settings. That's easy enough to change. I know that's something you want to necessarily worry about. You can set your playback speed here, however, and this is what I mentioned at the very beginning, that you can set it to play every frame. And this playback speed, let's close this. We can make this a lot smaller. So this playback speed refers to how fast, you know, when I hit that play button in the timeline, how fast that's going to go. So, you know, right now I hit play every frame. Set my preference to play every frame. Maya's basically going to play it as fast as it can play it without skipping or dropping any frames. I can hit real time, and Maya's going to try to get as close as it can to real time. This is a decent way to test, but again, it's not completely accurate, so I really do recommend Playblasting early and often to test your animation. You know, in a pinch, you can use this in the timeline, but again, you want to Playblast as much as possible. So that's going to try and emulate real time, but again, not exact. You can do half speed. That's going to try to give you a slow motion preview, fast, other. So, and these are all set on basically what your set play, you know, frame rate is. So let's just set that at real time. And we'll hit save. Whoops, we closed our animation preferences. Let's go back to that. So those are our time slider preferences. And then if we go in animation preferences here, we can set a bunch of stuff. We can set whether auto key is on or off, and whichever you set in your preferences, that will be the default. And then we've got here, this is for auto key. Do we want to only key the modified attributes or all attributes? So, you know, if I take this ball, let's say I've got a key here, auto key is on. If I have all attributes set and I move this ball in Y, it's now set a key for all attributes. And I can, oh, that's our dope sheet. Let's go to our graph editor so we can see that really quick. Try not to go over time here. So We are on frame 22. Oh, so it did not. Oh, because I didn't save the preference. Auto key isn't actually on yet. So now that auto key is on, it sets a key for all attributes. If I move this guy, it's set a key. Oh, it looks like it. Oh, okay. So it only set. All right. So there. Let's go back here. Oh, so it's set to key modified attributes. Okay. So they only set a key on the Y, which is actually, I think, the preference that you want. If I set this to key all attributes and hit save, and now I move this, you know, it's, did it not save? It's going to set something on all keyed attributes. Let's go see. Key all attributes. Oh, on character sets. Okay, that's assuming that's why it didn't do it. So character sets, we don't have time to get into that today, but that's basically, you can set up a character set for a character, like, for example, a character set for the hands. So when you key the hands, it's going to key all the keyable attributes on the hands as opposed to modified attributes. So you want to keep this set basically at key modified attributes if you're using auto key. Again, I don't use it. I think it's a little too risky, so I'm just going to turn that off. The next thing is your default tangents for your in tangent, which would be this one on the left, and your out tangent would be this one on the right. You can set the defaults that Maya will set. So when you set a key in the timeline or the graph editor, how Maya will set that key initially. I like to stick with, it depends. So in my blocking pass, I like to stick with flat tangents. But let's talk about one more thing. I have 2 minutes. I'm gonna do it. I would recommend keeping these both at. I'm going to go with plateau. Plateau is actually my favorite, so I would do that. Linear, depending on if you're working on a really fast motion, you might want to go with linear to get a more accurate preview. But plateau is a pretty good starting point. Let's just save that. So I've got, you know, plateau tangents. Let's see my preview that way. One really cool, and this is a relatively new tool in Maya. Let me see, how did I get to it? I just learned about this tool. Oh, there it is, enable stepped preview. So that is basically going to see how it's changed all my tangents to stepped. And again, stepped is something that you would do in your blocking pass that's going to hold each key until the next one. Let's stop that super fast playback. So it's staying in this key. It's staying in the next key. That's just a really cool thing to go back and forth between blocking, and then if you uncheck it, it goes back to show your normal animation. So that's a really cool tool. So it looks like we are out of time. I apologize, there were a couple things I didn't get to, but I'm going to stay on a few more minutes in case anyone has any questions. Let's see if I can get this window a little bit bigger. Anybody have any questions? Are you guys still there? Still here. Okay, good. Fantastic. Oh, sorry. My name is Sarah. Sarah Wade. Actually, I teach a bunch of different classes currently. I think the next two I'll be teaching are level design and 2D animation. I teach a lot of the 3D animation classes as well. And my email is, let me type this in. Let's see, and we've got, oh yeah, Alex, I totally remember you from Team Production. You guys did a great game. Yeah, so that's my email. If anybody has questions about this presentation later on, or something pops into your head and you think, oh my God, what was that key code? Just shoot me an email. I check it pretty regularly, so I should be pretty quick to get back to you. More presentations? I do. I will have a presentation this coming Thursday at the same time, and that will be on the Unity animation tools. So we'll go over animator versus animation. We'll do the Mechanim animation stuff, basically how to get your animation into Unity and get it, you know, working in a game. So kind of goes along with this one, a little bit different skill set. So if you can make that one, I definitely recommend it. And these presentations, of course, are all recorded, so this will be on the department YouTube channel. And yeah, let me pause or stop this recording, and I will get that link for you. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. Stop.